Okay, we're continuing with the hidden history of nutrition and health and science, and we're going through the ancient Romans. We're almost done with the ancient Romans. This will be the conclusion of the ancient Romans. So we last lectured part 1 on Romans. We talked about Nero starting the fire 64 AD, burned down 1/3 of Rome, blamed it on the Christians, okay? And so then after blaming it on the Christians, he had to punish them. So in the Colosseum, he would crucify Christians and then he would feed them to the lions. Okay. And the Christians, they would sing, Christ will conquer. And this put the Christians in front of all the Roman people. And they said, well, gee, they're not savage barbarians like most of us. The Christians are better than us. They're nicer than us. They have faith in their God. No one else believes that the pagan gods will really do anything for them. The Christians believe they're going to have eternal life in heaven. And they behaved in such a noble fashion that more and more Romans started converting to Christianity. They could see these people are good. We want to be like them. Women had tremendously increased respect in the Christian religion than they did in the pagan Roman religion. Okay? In Rome, a man could just dump his wife and get a new wife and leave the other one in the gutter. He didn't have to give her anything. Okay? Whereas, the Christians said you should be married for life. The purpose of your marriage is to have children and raise a family. Okay? So that was a very high status for them. Also, Christianity said you are created in the image of God. Therefore, there's something special about each and every one of you. You're all, deserving of rights and respect and kind treatment. That was not the way it was in Rome. Rome was pater familias, okay? The father could do whatever he wanted. Okay, next painting here, a very famous painting. This is called Nero's Torches by a Polish artist, Henryk Siemradzki. And so basically what Nero would do, there's Nero, he would just have the Christians tied up on top of a pole, a tree, and he would burn them as a torch to use for light at night. So Nero was not very nice. Another thing you'll notice is, out of the 12 apostles, 11 of them were martyred. They would not have allowed themselves to be martyred if they did not believe that Jesus Christ was God. Okay, that's well known. That's another strong reason for belief. I've read all the Christian apologetics. If you're interested in that, the best book to read is The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It's the best one out of all of them. It's concise, right to the point, very entertaining. So basically, Christianity gave power to the poor. And that's another reason why Nietzsche hated it. He's like, what kind of a religion is this? It's a religion for poor people, for the scum of the earth. I want a religion for the strong, the smart, the aristocrats. Okay, Nietzsche was a thug. The more you actually really learn about him, people tend to like him up at first because he's kind of funny, but irreverent. But once you get to see what he's really talking about, he's a scumbag. I mean, his heroes were like Napoleon and Bismarck, just warrior thugs. All right, this is Cleopatra testing poisons out on condemned prisoners, painting by Alexandre Cabanel, the French artist. Okay, and this gives you a sense of what she and Egypt thought about, the peasants. And it's the same thing with the ancient Romans. To them, the peasants were just like farm animals, and that's why you don't want atheism. Atheism and these ancient cultures, the regular person is a peasant. They're not creatures created in the image of God. They are livestock farm animals owned by the ruler. And it's inevitable that you will have this type of treatment of the peasant if you don't have Christianity. It's just a fact. All the smart people know this. Anybody who's really educated, read a lot of history, this is obvious. Okay? Why do you think secular rulers always want to get rid of Christianity? Because it gives too much power to the people. It tells them they deserve free speech. It tells them they deserve natural rights, that they're created in the image of God. They're equal in the eyes of God. You think a secular ruler wants that? No, they want total power for themselves. They want to be a god on earth, okay? And they have to get rid of Christianity. It's old news. It's almost embarrassing that I have to keep saying this, but I know that all these public school ignoramuses don't know it, so I have to repeat it. But it's obvious. You have a metaphysical, philosophical foundation at the bottom of a culture that determines how it sees things. If you're creatures created in the image of God, you're entitled to treatment with some respect, kindness, and fairness. And if you're not, then you're just a dumb animal owned by the ruler, and you need to shut up and do as you're told. Okay, that's a fact. There's no way around that. Okay, continuing on here with the Romans. They made some really good domes. Here's the Pantheon. Pan meaning all, and theon meaning God. So all the different gods were, had their sculptures and whatnot in there. And the Roman emperors considered themselves gods as well. The Romans started the first newspapers, Acta Diurna, Acta Publica. They made the first bound books that were called a codex. The Greeks just had scrolls, but the Romans made real books that were bound. And here's a good quote about what it was like for a Roman aristocrat, A Roman aristocrat, he could have his own personal library of books. If he wanted to study history, he could read the ancient Greek historians, Thucydides, Herodotus. He could also read the more recent historians like Plutarch, Later, Tacitus and Livy. If he wanted to study philosophy, he had more complete than we do the works of Plato and Aristotle. If he wished for literature or drama, he could read the Greek stuff, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Oresteia, the Oedipus plays, Antigone, Electra Medea. He could read the Aeneid and more. Our Roman citizen, he'd have easy access to his work. Rome also had over 25 public libraries in the time of the Emperor Antonine, with books that could be checked out for reading at home. The affluent people would buy the books rather than borrow them, which was easy enough. There were plenty of booksellers. So some of the Roman aristocrats were quite educated. This is a quote from Charles Murray in his book called Human Accomplishment, where he graded and studied all the great achievements. So here's Seneca, the Roman philosopher, senator. He said, any house of pretension would have its own library of shelves of cedar wood and ivory from floor to ceiling, of bookshelves. So there were some real educated people in Rome. The greatest of them all, of course, is Cicero. Rome developed the most sophisticated military of their time, organized into legions. Here's Trajan's column celebrating his conquests. Here's a detail from one of Trajan's column using the turtle formation that the Romans used to fight with so they could block themselves from things thrown above them and things thrown towards them. The Romans had great generals, and the greatest of all time amongst the Romans was Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar is one of the biggest badass men who ever lived. Here's just a classic story about Julius Caesar. He had been a very good soldier, and then as a young man, he was kidnapped at sea by some pirates, and they charged a ransom for him to return him back to the Romans. And when they were charging the ransom, Julius Caesar said, "No, you should charge more from me. I am a great man." And then Julius Caesar, when he was being released, he said to him, he goes, "I want you to remember my face. All of you who have done this to me, kidnapped me, held me for ransom, I'm going to come back and I'm going to hunt you down and I'm going to crucify each and every one of you." So as soon as he got back to Rome, he got together a group of men and they sailed the seas until they found the guys who had kidnapped Caesar. And he crucified every single one of them. That's typical Julius Caesar behavior. He was jealous of Alexander the Great, who had conquered, most of the known world while he was still a young man, around 30 years of age. And he felt that he hadn't really done much by the time he was 30. He used to cry about that. And so he went into Gaul and he crushed Gaul. He brutalized Gaul. And he was very cruel. Basically, you obeyed Julius Caesar or you paid a very high price. So here's the leader of the Gauls, Vercingetorix, and he eventually was forced to surrender to Julius Caesar. There's another painting of it over here. So here's Julius Caesar, Vercingetorix. He had him paraded around to entertain the people of Rome, and then he killed them. That's kind of... Caesar was brutal. He was not that nice. Now, don't get me wrong. Rome was a brutal place. Rome was not like ancient Greece. For example, in Spartacus, when there was a slave revolt, Crassus, one of the triumvirate, he said, "Oh, we can't have the slaves revolting like this." He had on the Appian Way, every 100 yards, he would crucify another one of slaves. He crucified hundreds of them. So everybody who traveled down the road into Rome they would see hundreds of crucified slaves, and he said, let this be a lesson to you. You don't revolt against Rome. Okay? They're brutal. The Romans were absolutely brutal. You know, they were not, that's going to come up again here. I'm going to share with you a quote by a historian. This is a guy named Tom Holland. He said, when I was a young man, I admired the ancient Greeks and Romans more than the Christians. The ancient Greeks and Romans seemed so much more exciting. However, with more experience in life, I started to see things differently, like when he was in his 30s. As I was studying the ancient Romans, I realized they were quite foreign to me. Julius Caesar killed over 1 million Gauls, and he didn't seem to have any remorse about it. You know? He said, that did not resonate with me. I realized that my value system was not like the ancient Greeks and Romans. My value system was Christian. Yeah, the more you study the ancient Romans, the more you will see that to be the case. They were not reasonable. They were not nice. They were brutal. They were savage. They were kind of almost like scumbag thugs compared to the ancient Greeks. Yeah, there's some exceptions, of course, like Cicero, but Romans were pretty bad. There were a few bright ones that could write. Here's the book by Edith Hamilton. She's a great scholar of the ancient Greeks and Romans. You know, she liked Horace and Juvenal and a few other ones, and Ovid. Why did Rome fall? There's multiple reasons. One reason is they had lead in their plumbing pipes, and this lowered their IQs. They became more and more decadent and immoral, stupid behavior, unwilling to defend their borders. And here's Romans in Their Decadence by Thomas Couture, 1847. Here is the painting then of the waning of the Emperor Augustus and the rising age of Christianity with the birth of Christ by Jean-Léon Gérôme. And so basically, the old Roman way was fading out, and the Christians were the new and upcoming thing. And the Christians, like I said, everybody wanted to start becoming a Christian because they were so much happier. They were so much nicer. They behaved so much better. They were so honorable in comparison with the Romans that, you know, they were the light of the world. They still are the light of the world. Most of what is good in the world comes from Christianity. The best painting, as you see here, the best architecture, all the Gothic cathedrals, okay, the best music, all the Christian music, all the classical music, and all the music, other music too, produced by, Western cultures that would only come from Christianity, the folk music, etc. It's all Christian in its base, okay. The best literature, about 18 out of the top 20 novels, or 19, are all Christian. It's like that, right? The first hospitals that allowed the poor people to be patients, the first charities, the first Magdalene centers. In Rome, if you were poor or homeless, or orphan, it's like, well, screw you. It's your fault. You angered the gods. They're just brutal. The more you study Rome, the more you'll be amazed at how brutal they were. Okay, religion means like relegare, to ligate, to tie people together. But anyways, Rome could not hold itself together. And then the barbarians began to sack it. So here's a sack of Rome by Karl Briulov. Okay, you can see the place is getting looted and burnt and destroyed. And then here's another painting of, hold on a sec, is this Rome or is this modern Europe? Oh, it's both. Okay, now here is another painting of the sack of Rome. Okay, they're tearing down the statues here. This is by Joseph Noel Silvestre. I like that he writes his name on the stone there. So, rather brutal. And that's what happened to Rome. By 476 AD, Rome was toast. Okay, that's our video for today. But the Catholic Church lived on and sort of maintained what it could of ancient Rome. Then later on, the Irish monks and stuff kept it. All right, we'll come back to more history of science. And now we're ready to move into more of the post-Rome era.